Shalom, Brother Tom.
Shalom, Brother Burke.
I have a question for you today.
Okay.
My question is, how do you understand Genesis 1?
Well, when I think about Genesis chapter 1, I like to get the context correct, get the context right in which it was written. And to the best of my knowledge, the creation narrative in Genesis chapter 1 was put together by Jewish scribes during the Babylonian captivity. And it was a response to the creation narrative of their Babylonian captors. So the Babylonians had an idea that the creation occurred when there was a great battle in heaven, and the gods were divided into two camps. Each had their superior being that was warring against the other, and the act of creation was done in a great and violent struggle between the gods in the heavens. So perhaps some god like Marduk destroyed a god by the name of Tiamat, this female god, and she was turned inside out, and this became the earth or something along that line, and her blood became something else. And so there's this great violence that occurred during their creation narrative. And now the Jews and others were taken into captivity by the Babylonians, and the Babylonians thought it would be normal to subjugate other people groups through violence, through force, through subjugation, because after all, that's the way the earth was created. The earth was created and ordered through violence, so empires could use the same techniques in order to subjugate weaker peoples and people who did not have such a strong god as Marduk on their side. And the Jewish narrative is coming out in this environment, and they have a very different view. So, for example, like the Jews believe that actually they weren't subjugated to the Babylonians because the Babylonians were stronger, because they had a superior god to them, but rather they were subjugated because their God, the one true and only God, was not pleased with them. They weren't serving their God correctly, and as a result, their God sent them into captivity into Babylon. And therefore, the Babylonians, in a sense, were just being used by the one supreme God to bring his people into some kind of a school of learning until they learned to serve their God correctly. So, as a consequence to their view of God and the fact that their God is the only God, and therefore the creation narrative is not a narrative of struggle where their God had to battle and duke it out with other gods, but rather their God is simply the one who spoke things into being. He said the word, and it came to pass. So the big distinction between the Jewish version and the version of the nations is that their God doesn't struggle with something like creation. God does it in a very simple and straightforward way by speaking the word, and all things come into being through that spoken word without struggle, without this kind of necessary turmoil. And as a result, their God is actually superior to the gods of the nations. So did that suffice, my brother?
Yes, sure. So you're saying that the Jewish version of this creation story is peaceful.
It's peaceful, yes.
But the other one, the nation's creation story, were out of chaos. It it burned.
Yeah, so that the nations seem to always have a very violent creation narrative. And there are many gods involved, and it's something where that there is actually a difference in the character of the God of Israel and the gods of the nations. So the God of Israel does all things good. He does it out of love, and God has a special love for human beings. And the God of Israel desires men to love God in return and to serve him out of love. Out of the love that God demonstrates, we're supposed to reflect that love back to God in service. So that the gods of the nations do not have this kind of character. The gods of the nations are self-serving. They expect mankind to work in their behalf, and the only reward that is offered to men is that they don't suddenly get killed by these all-powerful gods. And so it's more of the gods of the nations are gods of appeasement, whereas the God of Israel is the God of mercy. He does all things by his mercy and through his love.
There is a big difference.
A huge difference, yes.
So this God of Israel, that Jewish story would make people more loving, more peaceful. But if the nation stories were true, that would make people more violent, more.
It would make them more violent. Yes, that's right.
So this is a good purpose, and it is a great view of Genesis 1.
Yes.
Thank you for this story.
Okay. Thank the Lord.